Welcome to NTD Business. I'm Don Ma. U.S. stocks ended mixed on Friday with gains in healthcare offsetting a dip in some of Wall Street's most valuable companies. Nvidia, Microsoft, and Meta platforms lost ground, while the S&P 500 utilities sector gained the most. Netflix dipped for a second straight day. American Express fell after the credit card giant missed quarterly revenue estimates and affirmed its full-year profit forecast. Analysts attributed Friday's choppy trading to the expiration of monthly options and the expected special rebalancing of the multi-trillion-dollar Nasdaq 100 at the close of trading. S&P 500 gained 1.81 points, mostly unchanged, while the Nasdaq lost 30 points, or 0.2%. The Dow added 8.21 points, or mostly unchanged as well. And U.S. equity funds suffered outflows in the 7 days to July 19th. Investors are cautious ahead of the Federal Reserve's meeting because bets on rate hikes rose amid robust consumption data. Investors withdrew a net $3 billion from U.S. equity funds during the week, posting the first weekly outflow since June 21st. Data from Refinitiv showed this. Some sector funds, however, saw the opposite. Investors poured a net $1.26 billion, $1.04 billion, and $753 million, respectively, in financials, tech, and industrial sector funds. Meanwhile, U.S. money market funds witnessed a second weekly outflow in a row, worth about $3.47 billion. Top AI companies, including OpenAI, Alphabet, and Meta platforms, have made voluntary commitments to the White House to implement measures like watermarking AI-generated content. This is to help make the technology safer. The Biden administration said on Friday. Here are the details.
Top names in tech have promised to take steps to make AI content safer. That's according to the White House. It says Google, Meta, ChatGPT creator OpenAI, and others have said they will add watermarks to AI-generated content. That's meant to make it easier to know when AI has been used to generate material of all kinds. Such watermarks could help people spot deepfake images and scams, though it's not yet clear how the marks will be evident when content is shared. The agreement will be seen as a win for Joe Biden's call to regulate the technology more closely. He's working on an executive order and bipartisan legislation to govern AI. Congress is already considering a bill to require political ads to disclose whether the tech was used to create imagery or other content. Now, the new effort will also see other measures to make AI safer. The firms involved, which also include Amazon, have promised to thoroughly test systems before releasing them. They've also agreed to share information on how to reduce risks.
Investors' rush to the safety of cash may be peaking. This is according to Bank of America Global Research. There was a net $10 billion of outflows from cash in the 2 weeks to Wednesday, Bank of America said. The collapse of Silicon Valley Bank jolted markets, and the rush for cash in the first half of this year was further reinforced by central banks continuing to hike interest rates. And bank loans saw inflows of $400 million. This is the most since May 2022. The summer travel season is underway, and Americans across the country are looking to take a well-deserved vacation. But airline disruptions combined with inflation have left some consumers concerned if they can, in fact, afford taking a trip. NTD's Andrew Thomas reports.
It's been a rough year for air travel. According to a recent Bankrate survey, nearly 80% of respondents said they had experienced at least one travel-related problem over the past 6 months. Nearly a quarter of travelers cited poor customer service and flight disruptions.
The airline industry has struggled to keep up, though, because they're dealing with shortages of pilots and flight attendants. There's an air traffic controller shortage. Airplanes have been caught up in that whole supply chain mess.
While more than half of respondents cited higher prices as their primary concern, demand for air travel remains strong, despite inflation.
Really what we're seeing across the board is robust demand for travel, dining, concerts, sporting events. It's really experiences that are leading the way right now, even as people cut back on some physical goods spending.
Bankrate reports that almost 2/3 of Americans have taken or plan to take a trip this year, and they're looking to save on expenses. Credit card points, hotel points, frequent flyer miles, and travel websites are all great resources. Flexibility is also a valuable tactic.
A lot of times people get their heart set on a specific place at a specific time, and that just boxes you in. It makes it harder to save. If you're flexible with your destination or your dates, what you can really do is let the deal dictate when and where you go.
Earlier this year, Bankrate found that more than half of Americans can't afford a $1,000 emergency expense, so it's important to stick to a budget, especially with credit card interest rates at record highs.
We don't want to add to it. So are there lower cost things you could do, even aside from using rewards points and miles? Could you do a road trip? Could you even do a staycation?
According to Bankrate's survey, 44% of travelers will spend $1,000 or more on a trip. 16% say they'll drop at least $5,000. Andrew Thomas, NTD News.
Meanwhile, just 1% of all U.S. homes have changed hands so far this year. This is according to data from Redfin, and it represents the lowest figure in at least a decade. The company data showed only about 14 out of every 1,000 existing homes moved from one owner to another in the first half of 2023. In 2019, it was 19 out of every 1,000 homes. Now, experts believe the rate should be closer to 40 or 50 homes out of 1,000 in an active market. Real estate professionals believe high interest rates and a low inventory of homes on the market are the main reasons for the current trend. And Amazon is bringing its pay-by-palm technology to Whole Foods stores. The company announced Thursday that its Amazon One Palm recognition system will soon be in more than 500 Whole Foods stores by the end of the year. Amazon rolled out the technology in 2020, and it is currently available in more than 200 Whole Foods stores nationwide. Panera Bread, Hudson Airport stores, and sports stadiums also offer the technology. Whole Foods customers who choose to use Amazon One won't need their wallet or a phone to pay. They can simply hover their palm over an Amazon device. However, not everyone is on board for paying by palm. Some privacy experts have raised concerns about Amazon One and sharing biometric data. And could lab-grown meat be worse for the environment than real meat? Studies from Oxford and UC Davis suggest that it could be. NTD's Faye Corder explains how.
One of the key goals of lab-grown meat is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the atmosphere. But studies have shown that producing it could be even worse for the environment than real meat by emitting even more greenhouse gas. A recent study from UC Davis found that lab-grown meat could be orders of magnitude worse than real meat. This is because, using current methods, it takes an immense amount of energy to grow this meat in the lab. Electrical energy from burning fossil fuels puts carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. In particular, growing meat requires highly purified growth media. Animal cells are placed into this media inside bioreactors. The growth media contains nutrients, which help the animal cells grow and multiply. The researchers found that purifying this growth media causes 4 to 25 times more emissions than producing real meat. An earlier study from Oxford had the same conclusion. Its researchers found that maintaining the environment that the meat grows in involves a massive amount of energy. Traditional meat-making methods emit greenhouse gases when animals emit methane through their digestive process. While methane is a greenhouse gas, it stays in the atmosphere for about a decade. Meanwhile, the carbon dioxide that laboratories use to grow meat remains for centuries to millennia. Faye Corder, NTD News.
AMC Theaters is walking back on plans to charge more for good seats. AMC announced Thursday that it's ending its Sightline tiered seat pricing pilot. Now, under the plan, moviegoers who sat up by the front of the theater directly next to the screen paid less for a ticket compared to those who chose more desirable seats in the middle of the theater. The program began earlier this year in some theaters. However, AMC says they're pivoting away from it after results from the pilot program revealed that people still didn't want to sit right at the front of the theater, even with a slight discount on the tickets. Moving forward, AMC says it's gearing up to test more spacious front rows with seats that recline in theaters nationwide later in the year. It seems like shoppers are snapping up Barbie hoop earrings, perfume, jumpsuits, and dresses as retailers seek to cash in on Friday's Barbie film release. And this could be reigniting the craze for the plastic doll. Here's more.
Shoppers are snapping up a whole host of Barbie-related items as retailers seek to cash in on Friday's film release. Barbie dresses, perfume, jumpsuits and accessories are flying off the shelves, and many of the vast range of products are aimed at adults. That as retailers bet on igniting nostalgia in those who played with the doll as children. Mattel, who owns the brand, aims for the film to renew the doll's nostalgic appeal, while also embedding Barbie into the psyche of a new generation. Zara's Barbie collection, launched on Monday, offers 85 items for adult women and 17 for children. Men too can buy into the trend with a fuchsia suit, or cowboy boots and denim shirt. By Wednesday, on its UK site, the perfume, hoop earrings and pink-cropped hoodie were all sold out, as was the fuchsia double-breasted suit blazer for men. Apparel and footwear brands from H&M to Primark, Gap, Superga and Crocs have also launched Barbie collections. The Barbie Crocs, priced $10 more than the normal pairs at almost $60, were also out of stock. And luggage brand Base has a waiting list for all 3 sizes of suitcases in a Barbie pink, priced at a premium. It's not just retailers. Hyatt Hotels and Hilton are offering Barbie-themed hotel suites in cities such as Kuala Lumpur. Now, analysts say the sheer amount of merchandise raises a danger of the brand overstretching. But Mattel and partners hope a renewed emphasis on diversity and inclusivity from the Barbie franchise will provide enough novelty to keep people interested.
The U.S. commercial property market has faced severe challenges since the pandemic due to lingering office vacancies and diminished retail activity. While regional banks carry the greatest exposure to the commercial real estate sector, second quarter earnings show that a number of big banks as well have prepared for potential defaults, primarily on office loans. And today, I wanted to focus particularly on San Francisco. The city is seeing employees refusing to go back to the office, and this is impacting the city's economy. Now, here to talk to me about this is Derek Georgino, risk consultant in the greater LA area and NTD contributor. So, Derek, it seems like more and more people are now talking about San Francisco's empty office spaces and fleeing businesses. You know, office workers going remote. It actually reduced the city's tax revenue by almost $500 million. That's according to a study. Maybe start us off with some context. What is happening here?
Yeah, well, last week, Salesforce's CEO, Mark Benioff, vocalized his concern about the state of metropolitan San Francisco. And I would say that, Don, it would be wise of San Francisco's political leadership and even that of California to heed his cautionary statements, considering Salesforce is San Francisco's largest employer and the main tenant of the tallest building in San Francisco. Salesforce employs about 10,000 people in San Francisco alone, and it's become somewhat of an institution of the city. So this man has a very close thumb on the pulse of what is happening in that city. And what he said, and I quote, is that the city is never going back to the way it was. To your point, an increasing remote workforce is a huge driver of it. Obviously, the pandemic transformed our nation's workforce into a more remote one. And it's resulted in dwindling business hour crowds in a lot of metropolitan areas throughout the United States, but particularly in San Francisco. And I've even seen it myself, serving various clients throughout Los Angeles. I've seen many restaurants and family businesses close in metropolitan areas that I serve because of this increasingly remote workforce. In San Francisco in particular, Don, places heavy reliance on the tech industry. And about 70% of workers or so in tech are fully remote. And that percentage goes up to over 80% if you include hybrid workforce members, which are folks who work part of the time from home and part of the time in person in the office. And so many of these businesses, particularly in San Francisco, particularly retailers and restaurants, relied heavily on the foot traffic that nearby commerce would bring them throughout the day during the work week. And a significant amount of our workforce still won't return to work in person, and it's leading to a slowdown in traffic and economic activity in San Francisco, and also vacant office spaces. The Associated Press reported recently, Don, that office vacancy rates in San Francisco are now 5 times higher than they were pre-pandemic, and they're well above the national average when compared to the top 10 cities in America.
So the Salesforce CEO saying that it'll never go back to normal. What does that mean, normal, to you?
I would say pre-pandemic foot traffic, pre-pandemic business activity. But, there's, I would say, broader issues than just the pandemic in San Francisco. We're now a couple years post height of the pandemic, and big brands, huge brands, continue to leave downtown San Francisco. San Francisco is undergoing what Axios and many others are referring to as a retail exodus, Don. And bear with me here. There's a little bit of a list that I want to read out, and it's by no means inclusive of all the brands leaving the city, but it's significant. November 2020, during the pandemic, H&M closed its flagship store in downtown San Francisco. March 2021, Uniqlo, multi-billion-dollar clothing retailer, closes its Union Square store. May 2023, Nordstrom, multi-billion-dollar department store chain that many of your viewers are probably familiar with, cited rising crime in the city, closed its San Francisco stores. In January of this year, Meta, which needs no introduction, announced that it's drastically reducing its San Francisco office space. Lyft, another big player in San Francisco, in August of 2022, announced that it would cut its San Francisco office space by 250,000 square feet. And just a few weeks ago, Old Navy, a household name, just recently closed an enormous flagship store on Market Street in downtown San Francisco. The list goes on and on. Whole Foods, Amazon Fresh. As other cities, Don, have taken steps to recover from the pandemic over the past few years, San Francisco has not, at least not sufficiently. And this retail exodus is doing a lot of damage to the local economy there.
Okay, I want to get to the damage, but first, you mentioned crime. So does that mean, other than remote work, crime is also playing a big factor into this? Huge role,
particularly in San Francisco property crime, burglary and theft. And retailers are a huge target of petty theft and property crime. In 2019, heading into the pandemic, Don, the San Francisco Chronicle had reported that the city was ranked number 1 in the nation in property crime, particularly among major cities in America. And that was before the pandemic. And then in 2020, during the pandemic, the property crime rate of San Francisco was reported by the FBI to be 41% above the national average. Now, let me just say, a man by the name of George Gascon was district attorney in San Francisco from 2011 to 2019. And according to the LA Times, during his tenure, property crime went up by 37% over there. And this included a record high number of auto burglaries in 2017, over 30,000 of them. And of course, by the time he left San Francisco in 2019, Don, that city led the nation in property crime, as I just pointed out. And during his tenure as district attorney of that city, misdemeanor charges, Don, were only filed in 40% of the cases that the San Francisco Police Department brought up. And this included many cases of petty theft. Of course, now Mr. Gascon has moved to spread the gospel of his wonderful leadership to the city of Los Angeles. And, maybe if we're lucky, some of the foot traffic in LA will reduce a little bit and I'll spend less time on the Interstate 5. But I'd rather not at the expense of property crime and theft, of course. But it's a huge issue, particularly in San Francisco. They've been for several years now a known leader in the nation in property crime, and that impacts retailers in particular. And many of those retailers that I just listed off that are closing stores in San Francisco, leaving San Francisco altogether, many of them cite rising property crime rates in the city. So it's a disaster in that respect.
I mean, there's a lot of moving parts, I would imagine, that is causing this problem, this rising in crime. You touched on a couple just now. Maybe you can elaborate further. I mean, what's really leading to all this rising crime?
Well, as I just mentioned, I think for many years and even now, it's a soft approach to prosecuting and penalizing petty theft in San Francisco. I just mentioned that rate of misdemeanor charges only being brought from 2011 to 2019, and 40% of cases that the police department in San Francisco brought. So if you don't prosecute these crimes and people are not adequately punished for them, frankly, then retailers are going to leave. I mean, you have certain household items, not just in San Francisco, but also in other metropolitan areas in the country, behind lock and key in some of these stores, deodorant sticks in some cases, behind lock and key, behind a plexiglass box where you have to go to the front desk and so forth to check them out. It's unbelievable the time that we're living in, and San Francisco's suffering from it big time. There have been tons of break-ins in downtown retail outlets, and they don't want to put up with it anymore. It's also worth mentioning too that San Francisco County is like the sixth highest taxed county according to the Tax Foundation of the United States. So I know we talk about crime, we talk about homelessness, we talk about the virtual workforce, but cost of living there is also just ridiculous, at least for what you're getting. And in terms of the homelessness issue, over 30,000 people in the Bay Area of California are homeless, and that's grown by over 30% over the last 4 years or so, according to McKinsey.
What's being done about it, this homeless situation?
You tell me. I don't really know, Don. The issue over there continues to get worse and worse. Tony Bennett, a great singer, actually passed away today. And one of his best songs was I Left My Heart in San Francisco. And it's kind of a story about being a little lost in Manhattan and, wanting to go back to San Francisco to where it's beautiful and you've got friends and family and everything. And it's a beautiful song. Right now, the city of San Francisco is not doing Mr. Tony Bennett's song much justice. And it's a very sad thing to see. And myself growing up, I used to go to San Francisco nearly every year on vacation with my family. And I'll tell you, having been there recently, it's nowhere near what it used to be, even as recent as 10 years ago. So it's a sad state of affairs.
I wonder if there's a correlation between remote work and the rising crime. I mean, I would imagine, correct me if I'm wrong, but why would I go to the office where there's a lot of crime when I can just work from home?
Absolutely. And obviously, the other impact in that too is if people aren't going to the office to work, they're not going out with their colleagues to get lunch. They're not providing business to all the family-owned restaurants and retailers and big names as well. Again, when I was mentioning this retail exodus, it wasn't small names. I'm talking about big names. But the small names shouldn't be forgotten. They're leaving as well. But to your point, safety is huge as well. A couple of these retailers that I had mentioned who had left had actually cited safety concerns for their employees. Whole Foods, in particular, in April 2023, they had closed a major location in downtown San Francisco, and they had specifically cited concerns around safety for their employees. A lot of these folks that work as cashiers and so forth, they don't sign up to deal with petty criminals and burglars and people breaking into their stores and so forth. It poses a significant safety concern for them. They don't sign up to deal with that.
From your personal experience, what are some other reasons besides, safety that people are refusing to come back to the office?
Well, as I kind of discussed on a previous segment I did on your show, I think, the pandemic forced a lot of us to work in a different way. And a lot of people found more flexibility in doing that working from home. And it unfortunately, and I say unfortunately because this is my perspective, but a lot of people don't share this perspective, but I think unfortunately, it led a lot of people to opt for staying in the comfort of their own home and doing whatever work they can rather than connecting in person with their colleagues and getting things done in person. And I totally understand, Don, that for many people, that flexibility in life provides a lot of benefits. But the reality is that it greatly damages our metropolitan economies. Not to mention, there are some studies out there, and there have been comments made by certain management consulting firms that efficiency in certain industries is damaged by just working from home as well. So there are pros and cons to it. But like I said, San Francisco has a huge reliance on tech in Silicon Valley, and that industry in particular found many ways to work remotely rather than in person. And so heavy reliance on that industry and that workforce means that a good chunk of traffic in San Francisco went virtual during and following the pandemic. There was actually an interesting study done recently from the University of Toronto that measured mobile device activity in San Francisco and in 60 plus other major cities in America. And they found that San Francisco's mobile device activity after the pandemic was just 32% of what it was before the pandemic. Now, either people are no longer addicted to their phones as before the pandemic, which I highly doubt, or San Francisco has a major problem on its hands. And I do think it's the latter, unfortunately. Not only was San Francisco not only did their activity only amount to 32% of what it was pre-pandemic, but it actually ranked last in this study when compared to 63 other American downtown metropolitan areas. You could compare this with other cities, even in California and in other states, where they actually had higher mobile device activity than before the pandemic. So it's perhaps indicative of the fact that this exodus from San Francisco and the Bay Area, these folks are going to other lower cost of living cities and counties and finding a home there. And, Don, people vote with their feet, right? The great economist Charles Thibault always said this: people vote with their feet. And, take it or leave it in studies on mobile device activity. Not everyone believes that that's indicative of economic activity in a city, but it's surely eye-opening.
Okay, so people have different opinions on remote work. They have their own arguments, but I just want to ask, in terms of creativity, when you have to work with a group of people to make something or to create something, is there a difference between speaking to somebody over a mobile device on a screen versus talking to them in person, just purely from a creative perspective?
Yes. And being in the professional services industry where I'm a consultant, there are certain visual and physical cues you'll get in the room with somebody when you're helping them solve a problem that you won't always get virtually. Not to mention, not everybody likes to turn on their cameras like the two of us have done right now. Some people are even off camera when you're working in a virtual setting. In that case, you have no visual cues whatsoever as to how the other person is receiving your ideas and what you're saying. And a lot gets lost in communicating with somebody when you miss those cues. A big component of active listening is being able to pick up on visual cues that people are leaving you. When I was previously on your show, Don, I think I had said something like, in my personal experience, I have found that tasks and projects which could have taken weeks maybe just took a few hours or a few days when working in person in the office with my colleagues and with my clients, rather than going back and forth via email over and over and setting up meetings on Zoom or Skype and so forth to keep going back and forth on the same issue. You get everyone in the same room, you workshop it for a few hours, you have a live dialogue, and things get done. at least particularly in the professional services industry. I know folks have different opinions on this in other industries, but I live in the professional service industry personally, and I have found a great benefit to getting a lot of my teams back in person in the office and at our client sites to support them.
All right, just one final question, and this has to do with economic impact with the exodus that we're seeing in San Francisco. I would imagine this would have an impact on GDP overall. I mean, if businesses are leaving, San Francisco is probably getting less tax revenue, and that directly impacts economic growth. I mean, what are some of the economic impacts that you can see?
Well, it's also even simpler than that, Don. Like, the population of San Francisco is decreasing in terms of people who just live there. And in the Bay Area, the population of San Francisco, I think, decreased by over 7% from 2020 to 2022. That was a huge loss, relatively speaking, to other difficult years that city has had. Well, of course, it's going to have an impact on GDP and spend. People are leaving the county. People are not leaving the comfort of their homes to give business to retailers in the area, as I pointed out. And when retailers leave and they vacate all this office space, it's incredibly damaging to the real estate economy of San Francisco. When you can't even fill these office spaces that you've invested in and built out with big brands, and the big brands are telling you, we want to leave. You know, Mark Benioff, CEO of Salesforce, just goes back to his comments. I think the city of San Francisco should be very concerned when someone like this speaks up, because given how much Salesforce has invested in its office space there in downtown San Francisco, if they were to take off, it would be immensely damaging to San Francisco. I believe Salesforce alone accounts for like about 2% of San Francisco's workforce, which is significant for one company to account for. And if they take off, who knows what the ramifications of that are. So, Mark Benioff's kind of talking about all these retail brands and noticing that downtown's more of a ghost town now, and it doesn't look like it's ever returning. But when CEOs start to chirp like that, sometimes they vote with their feet and they take off. I would be very concerned if I was San Francisco.
Well, all right. Thank you so much today, Derek. Always great to hear your insight.
Thanks for having me, Don. As always, appreciate it.